It's time, folks. It's time. A couple months ago, I had this kind of download, this really strong impression that I felt really strongly that in the Sunday before and the Sunday after the election, that we just needed to hold some space to approach this experience that we're all sharing in from the Aldea perspective. And when I shared last week that this was my intention, what I got from many of you was groans, which I guess is understandable, but it also illustrates the importance, I think, of having a conversation about this election and about politics. But I just want you to understand from my perspective, a feeling of nervousness and just understanding the delicacy of this situation. And really the image that popped to mind when it came to kind of my task today was of the game of Operation. But then I was reflecting on Operation and wondering why, a popular children's board game has a middle-aged naked man. I don't know. That's a different message entirely. But look, I respect... Like a game of Operation, I want to approach this conversation with delicacy, but also like a game of Operation, I appreciate that there is a need to have this conversation. I mean, he needed this operation. He has this Adam's apple and the water on the knee and stuff, so there's that delicacy and that need that go hand in hand. I also mentioned last week, after getting the groans, that I would be available in the lobby, for a pie in the face if you wanted to pay like a small fee. And I decided to up that to a dunk tank. So if you came in and you saw the dunk tank in the parking lot, that's for me. So if you're unhappy with the way this conversation goes after the service, you can, But I feel that it is, our responsibility as a community to hold space to have a conversation about this collective experience that we're all feeling, that we're all engaging in together. And before we get started, I do want to just say a few things. The first is that I am proud that we are a community that people all along the political spectrum have been able to call this place home. And if we weren't a place where people along the political divide can feel safe, then I would wonder, are we making good on our promise to be an inclusive community, right? Are we making good on our promise to be a place of belonging for all? And are we truly living out that motto of love, period? So the goal here is to navigate complexity together. And when I say together, I mean all across the spectrum, including people that may not agree with you. Last month, we had a series called Zoe, where we looked at the different dimensions of life, recognizing that there is a spiritual dimension of life, which the Greeks called Zoe, and there is a more physical, material dimension of life, which they called the bios, right? So there are these two different kind of layers of reality that we're always experiencing, right? And so when it comes to politics, when it comes to the election, there is the material, the bios, the people, right? The policies, the party, and these are important things. They have major effects on our life. But there is also the Zoe, the psychological and spiritual experience around these things. And so often this experience is overlaid on top of the physical, and we don't even have the ability to tell the two apart. I'll give you an example. During COVID, we had the physical, the material aspect of that situation, right? The illness, the lockdowns, the masks, all the changes in our material life, right? But then there was also the psychological and spiritual experience of the pandemic. The isolation, the confusion, the fear, right? And the freedom that you felt when you attended that first Zoom meeting without any pants on. It's like jury duty. Jury duty has this physical aspect, right? You're doing your civic duty, you're engaging in your judicial, duty in the process, and you're showing up early morning to a courthouse. But then there's also this spiritual experience of jury duty, which includes praying to a God you may or may not even believe in that you get dismissed. There's the physical and there's the spiritual. And friends, I have no intention, no desire to change your mind, right? To sway your vote one way or another. Chances are you've probably already voted. My goal here, my hope throughout these next 2 weeks is to help us observe our experience of all of this from a higher perspective, what we might call the spiritual perspective. And I want you to know that I'm committed to the spiritual journey that we are on as a community. And I find that for me is a priority, right? And so I want to give a little disclaimer before we truly get started. And it's that, we often say that, whether it's a celebrity or an athlete or even a church, we say, don't get political, right? Don't use your platform for anything political. But what we often really mean is don't be partisan, right? Don't use the platform to stand behind one party or the other. And what we probably really, really mean is don't say something that I disagree with, right? But in this series, I want to transcend all of that by looking at really what are we talking about when we talk about politics. And this is where the name politica comes from, because the word for politics in English is derived from the Greek politika, which means affairs of the cities. See, the ancient Greeks, the arrangement of their society was around city-states, right? So a city was more than just a metropolitan center. It was more like what we know as states. It was, the sense of identity and belongings, right? So when they describe politica as the affairs of the cities, what they're really saying is, this is how we arrange ourselves as people. This is the organization of society. And friends, how things are organized, the systems that we live in and participate in are crucial, right? They help us. As some of you know, I had a snake in my house a couple weeks ago, and the fact that I was able to call the fire department for them to come pick that up, that's part of the politica, right? Or how many of us like our hot shower in the morning? There is an aspect of that where it's how we arrange ourselves, because life, in a sense, in the politica sense, life is political, and yet so often we've ascribed a negative connotation to that word. And I think at its core, politica isn't referring to scathing attack ads or the endless barrage of text messages or this sense and this mindset that, my party is the savior and the opposing party is the devil, right? But it's really a conversation about how collective life happens. I'll give you another example. The word for government in the ancient Greek is kybernon. And this isn't a reference to like a planet from Star Wars. This is a Greek word which means to steer or to guide. When it was later brought into the Latin, it was specifically used to refer to the steering and guiding of a ship, right? So we need direction, kybernon, and we also need an arrangement, an organization, politica, right? But in talking about this, and really the purity of these words, I want to kind of jump over to some of our renowned spiritual teachers. Let's just take a second and talk about Jesus and Buddha, right? Both of whom we could recognize in the modern way we use that word. Jesus and Buddha were very apolitical, right? Jesus didn't speak about Caesar's policies. Buddha didn't speak on the regime of the day, and yet they were both very concerned with the systems and the way in which we arrange ourselves, the direction of collective life. I'll use an example. This is what theologian Brian Zahnd says. Jesus wasn't about creating an alternative political regime, but rather he offered an alternative vision for how human society should function, one rooted in love, compassion, and justice. This rings of the words of Buckminster Fuller, who said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Last week, Arlene shared a wonderful message on our perceptions, how we perceive things through our particular lens of reality, and she ended her message with a challenge, and it's actually a well-known challenge. It's the 9-dot challenge. So if you were here last week, she ended and she invited you to see if you could complete the 9-dot challenge. And the idea is can you connect all of these dots in 4 strokes or less without raising your pen or your pencil. And so she invited you to see if you could figure it out, and she has a message. She's not here today, but she has a message to those of you who did.
Hey, Aldea, good morning. My name is Arlene, for those who don't know me, and I am here to show you the 9-dot puzzle solution that we talked about last week. So I would love to know, it's too bad I can't be there today, but I would love to know how many people brush their teeth with the opposite hand. Anyway, 9-dot solution. Are you ready? There's a couple ways to do this, but here's the one that works best. There you go. Are you thinking out of the box? I hope you have a lovely Sunday. Bye, everybody.
Now, I spent some time on this before I went to Wikipedia for the answer. But you know what blew me away about this is you look at something like this 9-dot problem, and you're looking at it from the perspective that you were given, right? This problem was presented a certain way, right? And the box is small that we are given. So we can't imagine a way of connecting the dots, right, in the frame that we were handed. You have to actually expand the entirety of the frame to solve the problem. Friends, sometimes we have problems that we want to solve, both in our personal lives and within society. And like Buckminster Fuller reminds us, we can't solve it from the current reality that we're living in. We must think outside the box, building a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. We must zoom out for an entirely bigger box. Now, friends, good on you for voting. Good on you for caring. Good on you for contemplating the issues thoughtfully. And good on you for realizing and remembering that we co-create our collective reality together. But we also must recognize that there is a time to zoom out, right? Expand the borders of our box and remember the spiritual element of everything that we are walking through right now. And there's part of that has to do with empathy and compassion. Because next week, hopefully, we might have a sense of resolution, some definitive answers, hopefully. But it's important to remember that next week, 50% of this country will feel relief, and the other 50% will feel fear and confusion, right? And that same dynamic and duality will be experienced here in this community, right? So you may have one of 2 experiences next week. You may come into this place needing comfort, or you might come into this place, and I encourage you to recognize that your brothers and sisters and your peers may need comfort, that they may be scared and confused. But either way, we are going to need to imagine a path forward, okay? We talked about our capacity to imagine a couple months ago, reflecting on John Lennon's song, Imagine, talking about how our ability to imagine is how we create our life together. It's what exists in the imagination becomes reality. And so I encourage us collectively to imagine a path forward, not simply politically, but spiritually. How are we going to arrange ourselves in our lives and as a community? So over these next 2 weeks, I just want to give everything I have at providing some various frameworks and perspectives that we may bring comfort to ourselves and compassion to others. And I want to do this by really honing in on the idea of non-duality. We've talked about non-duality at different times. And non-duality can mean a number of things. It has a certain connotation in religion and spirituality in that context. So, for example, a religion based in duality, a dualistic religion, is one where there is a sort of hard line between self and the divine, right? Or self and other. There is a duality. And non-dual spirituality is an attempt to break down that line, to see that any sense of separation is an illusion, right? That there is a connectedness, there is a oneness to all things. This is the heart of non-duality in a spiritual context, but it can also be something that shows up in our lives. That we can recognize we are engaging in duality whenever we engage in black and white thinking, or us and them thinking, or red and blue thinking. Anytime we draw hard lines, we are engaging in duality, right? To say that on one side are the angels and on the other side are the demons. Right? This is a duality, and more duality has become the nature of our system, of our culture, of media. You can't turn on the television, it seems, these days without feeling steeped in a framework of duality, right? But non-duality recognizes that we are all more similar than we are different, right? That we have something so deeply in common in our shared humanity, right? Our DNA is 99.999% the same as one another. And we mustn't forget the human element in all of this, that human connection. This is why dehumanization is so effective, because when we dehumanize others, right, we don't see their needs, their wants, we don't recognize them as human, we don't place them on the same level, and there's no chance of this kind of non-dual connection, right? So may we realize that those who we disagree with, right, that all humans, we have similar needs and wants and desires in life, right? And a need and a desire to feel safe, to feel seen, to feel heard. Yes, the approaches to meeting those needs can be vastly different. But the real important question, friends, is how will we live together, right? How will we find ways to include the people that we so often make an other, right? Friends, we must realize that we can exclude ideas, but we can never exclude people, right? We must separate the two. Because we all have had ideas that we no longer resonate with, right? We all outgrow certain ideas. We know that you can have a bad idea. It doesn't make you a bad person. And if you need any reminder of the bad ideas you've had in your past, there's an archive that exists called Facebook. I was reflecting on some bad ideas that I had throughout my life journey around fashion. I'll share a few with you. I had a bad idea in the form of some sunglasses. I don't know what's going on here. Had a bad idea in the form of a cobalt blue leather jacket. And then in this whole ensemble, I was telling my friend Terrell, I can't wear beanies. It just doesn't work for me. So bad ideas doesn't make me a bad person. Doesn't reflect on my current fashion. Friends, we can criticize ideas, we can even reject ideas, but we can't reject our fellow brothers and sisters. Any of us who have been in any kind of relationship therapy, whether it's sort of family therapy or couples therapy, what you might have found, what you might have learned, is that problem solving needs to come after connection. Here's what I mean by that. What hopefully a therapist will walk you through is this realization. We so often come to conflict and come to situations of division, and we say, I want to solve the problem that caused this division. But so often, we have this flipped for us where we realize, no, we need to reestablish connection so we can work on this problem together, right? And how many of us know our country needs therapy, right? And so if we were to go to couples therapy as a country, right, two sides, right, we would be told we need to reconnect, we need to reunite and find healing before we can solve every individual problem. I'll give you an example. This is, so wonderfully spoken by Mother Teresa. She says, if we have no peace, it's because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. friends, we have no hope of reconnecting if we show up to these conversations with no shred of humility. We have no hope of belonging to one another if we don't have an openness to learning from others, or if we know beyond a shadow of our doubt that we could never be wrong about something, right? And yes, I know, friends, that so many of the things being debated over in this election feel like and are life or death at times. But I also just want to provide this alternative perspective that non-duality often serves to challenge our assumptions, to zoom us out of our perspectives that can often get narrow. And I want to give an example of this in kind of an ancient parable, an ancient folk tale. I've shared this once before on this stage, but I think it's very timely. It's an ancient Chinese folk tale, but it's also been known to have been retold by Alan Watts. And it goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a Chinese farmer whose horse ran away. That evening, all of his neighbors came around to commiserate. They said, "We are so sorry to hear your horse has run away. This is most unfortunate." The farmer said, "Maybe." The next day, the horse came back, bringing 7 wild horses with him. And in the evening, everybody came back and said, "Oh, isn't that lucky? What a great turn of events. You now have 8 horses." The farmer again said, "Maybe." The following day, his son tried to break one of the horses, and while riding it, he was thrown and broke his leg. The neighbors then said, "Oh dear, that's too bad." And the farmer responded, "Maybe." The next day, the conscription officers came around to conscript people into the army, and they rejected his son because he had a broken leg. Again, all the neighbors came around and said, "Isn't that great?" Again, he said, "Maybe." Friends, we just need to reserve a level of unknowing in our hearts, in our lives, right? Sometimes things that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt is a good thing can still bring bad outcomes. And something that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt seems bad can lead to good outcomes, right? May this perspective, even if you just choose to adopt it momentarily, may it open up this space within our hearts where we recognize that life is always existing in multiple dimensions, in multiple layers. There's always different aspects of life coexisting simultaneously. I'll give you an example. To come back to COVID, right? The COVID-19 pandemic, terrible for humans, great for nature, right? Right? So challenging and difficult for us as a species, right? Pretty great for the rest of nature because they finally got a break from humans constantly pushing the earth so hard through industry, and the fact that we were forced to take a break was amazing for nature, right? Or think about it like this: COVID, terrible for the economy, pretty great for bringing work-life balance back into a lot of people's lives, right? That through this process, many industries recognize that people don't need to be coming into the office as much, and so many people got so much time and so many aspects of their life back. So something as major as that can have multiple dimensions and layers through which we experience good and bad outcomes at the same time. Right? Think about this through different eras of human history. Right? How often do we kind of glorify, we look back and we say like, "Oh, America in the 1950s, it was just a golden age, everything was so nice and sweet." It was also pre-civil rights, so it was the golden age for some and not for others. Right? Think about the 60s, oh, peace, free love. Also, many political leaders and spiritual leaders being assassinated, Vietnam War, right? So in both society and also in our own lives, things can be happening on multiple levels, right? You can, at one period of your life, you can look back and go, "Wow, that was a great time in my life." And there was also some really hard things happening. Or, man, you look at that age and you're like, "Wow, I remember that age. It was so difficult." But also you have some great memories that you can remember from that time. Our lives, our experience of life is so multifaceted. So I'll give you an example. Next week, you may come in here and you might feel really discouraged. You might say, "Oh, we are in decline as a country." And at the very same time, you could say, "I'm going to then renew my commitment to spiritual growth," right? I'm going to go deeper than I ever have in my spiritual journey. You might come in here next week and you might say, "I'm so discouraged and I feel like we're only going to get more and more hateful as a country. And that could just mean that we as a community get all the more loving, right? That we make a commitment as individuals to be more loving. Friends, just to zoom out and look at this from a cosmic perspective, it's estimated that in our visible universe, that every single second, a star is born and a star dies. That not just planets, but entire solar systems are coming in and out of being every single second, right? So the endings and the beginnings and the great tumultuous nature of the time we're in is part of this larger cycle of change that the entire cosmos is going through. How many of us, over the past year, over the past couple of months, have said or heard something along these lines? This election and the outcome of this election feels like it could lead to the end of democracy or the end of our country as we know it, or even have horrific ramifications for our planet, right? Or at least how many of us have thought something along these lines? Wow, a lot more optimistic people than I realized. Oh my goodness. Well, I think if you don't realize this, there's a lot of people who feel this way, who feel these fears, right? Which means that there is a lot of apocalyptic thinking happening in our reality. And by calling it apocalyptic, it's not a judgment on whether or not it's good or bad. It's simply saying, this is where we go, right? Where our thoughts go, where our conversations go. And so I want to talk about this word, apocalyptic. In the Greek, the word apocalyptic comes from apokalypte, which means to uncover or to reveal. So apocalypse doesn't mean a fiery end to the world. It actually means a light shining that brings truth forth, right? So we look at the final book in the New Testament, Revelations, right? In so many ways, many of us were taught this as an apocalyptic book, but it's actually about a revelation of truth, not the end of the world, but the end of a particular way of being in the world, the end of a cycle, when we can appreciate it from a metaphorical perspective. And many people say that one of the greatest teachers on metaphor, Joseph Campbell, he said this: apocalypse does not point to a fiery Armageddon, but to the fact that our ignorance and our complacency are coming to an end. Friends, when we are at endings, sometimes the systems that we have come to hold dear stop working, right? Sometimes things like corruption feels all the more visible because this was always present, always true, but perhaps remained hidden and is now coming to the light, right? How many of us can see that Hollywood feels like it's an apocalyptic moment, right? Celebrity scandals coming out left and right. It feels like no one is safe, even people that many of us have idolized. Why? Well, there's probably a number of reasons, but one of the main reasons, I think, is because all of these things were already happening. We are just now aware. They are just now coming to the light because the light of truth, the light of the availability of information is shining, and it makes people who have been victimized less afraid to share their stories, right? So we look around and we say, oh, things have never been so bad, or maybe we have never been so aware. Because corruption and deceit thrives in the shadows, right? And the light of information, the light of truth, reveals what has already been, what was always there. I'll give you an example. How many times have you been sitting in your living room, right? And then all of a sudden, like a ray of light comes in, and it hits like a dresser or a piece of furniture, and you see how horribly dusty that furniture is, right? You're like, ew, I needed to clean this a couple of weeks ago, right? But a second before, you were all good and fine. You had no idea, and you were none the wiser. Ignorance is bliss, right? The light coming in revealed to you what was already there, right? So we're in a time that so many things, when we look at the world around us, they feel gross, they feel antiquated, right? Perhaps this is because of the illumination, the clarity, the visibility that is a gift, right? Sometimes the light shines in our lives, revealing things, right? Like how many of you don't have to raise your hands, but how many of you're like an empty nester, and when the kids moved out, you realized, oh, we got some stuff we need to work on in this marriage, right? Because the light shone in. Or maybe you received a diagnosis, right? Something health related, and what you found is, man, I need to really, there's actually a whole dimension of health that I haven't been examining, right? I've been ignoring my health in a holistic sense, and this diagnosis simply shone a light on all the ways that I could rethink my life. Or some of us have actually been to what we would call a true rock bottom moment in life. And yet the light of that challenging place and that moment actually shone in, and it revealed that maybe whatever behavior led you there was actually just the result of a deeper trauma, and it was finally an opportunity to get that real, true, and deep healing. I want to share a quote from Marianne Williamson, who, the irony is, Marianne was here maybe 6 months ago for a political event. And Marianne Williamson, she says this: "You must go through a period of emptiness to become full, through suffering to find peace, through confusion to discover clarity. The breaking apart is part of the journey to wholeness." Friends, when we are in a time in our lives and in the world that feels like a breaking apart, that feels like an emptying, perhaps it is also an unveiling. Perhaps it is also an invitation to discover the truth of who we are, which can often mean the false self, who we've so often believed ourselves to be, is just coming apart. And of course it's going to feel apocalyptic. Friends, whatever happens next week, whatever we walk into next week, love, period, is still going to be as true as it ever was, right? Love will still win, right? And my promise to you, like I said at the beginning, is that I'm committed to my spiritual journey, our spiritual journey together, and I believe from the bottom of my heart that our spiritual journey cannot be determined by whoever is in office. So friends, may we show up next week with a spirit of compassion for ourselves and for our peers, for our brothers and sisters. May we remember that reconnection, healing the divide, is a vital step towards problem solving. May we remember that often the best response to some of the greatest unknowns in our life is simply maybe. And may we remember that in what feels like an apocalyptic moment, that every end contains within it a new beginning. And I just want to close, as I invite Sylvia up to fully close us out, I just want to close with an invitation that, next week, we are going to be walking into this space with all kinds of heightened emotions, but I also want this place to be a space where we can contemplate and we can kind of exhale together. And so I ask that you just come in with an extra sensitivity next week, right? It would be so easy to come in and go into the lobby and share our opinions and kind of, have a big kind of emotional experience before we even walk in these doors. But I just encourage you to create a space of stillness for yourself and for others, right? That maybe you might think about walking into this building a little quieter than usual, perhaps even silent. And our service is going to have some elements to kind of walk us through that. But I just encourage a spirit of stillness and of contemplation next week. However you want to bring that, I just invite you to think about that.